Thank you for this very nice introduction. Thank you, Flora, and thank you, Vera, and thank you, Epites Forum. I'm very lucky to be part of the first Edge Festival. As a boring art historian, I will read my presentation, and I just hope that my images can deal with this huge screen, actually. The title and the topic of my presentation changed a bit a few weeks ago. Online you will find the title Mission Héliographique. I was planned to outline the short history of infrastructure and infrastructure photography, including 19th century projects and modern or contemporary protagonists like Bernard Hiller-Becher, Robert Smithson, Andreas Gursky, forensic architecture, and so on. Sorry, but then I just decided to focus on one of my favorite works by Robert Smithson, the Monuments of Passaic. Now I also decided on the lofty title, Infrastructure, Production, Temporality. The Monuments of Passaic is a series of photographs by Robert Smithson depicting construction sites and infrastructure, taken with a simple Kodak Instamatic 400 point-and-shoot camera. I have been under the spell of this artwork ever since reading the text, A Tour of the Monuments of Passaic, written by Robert Smithson himself and published in 1967 in Art Forum. Rather than an added explanation or analysis, the text is an integral part of the artwork itself. The photographs and the text are dealing, among many other things, with the infrastructural anthropogenic intrusion of the Earth's surface. Thinking about my role as an art historian at an architecture festival, I decided not to focus on architecture just because others are far better qualified to do so. Instead, I will focus on a few general terms and problems of our time, let's call them issues of global capitalism, and their connection to the aesthetics and logic of spatial organization. My aim of taking a closer look at the Monuments of Passaic is twofold. First, I hope to learn more about the logic of anthropogenic intrusion of the Earth. Second, I aim to explore some aspects of the aesthetics and spatial organization of the geological age Anthropocene. Over the next 20 minutes, I will follow a path from the cities to the suburbs and to sites of extraction, and then I will try to return back to the city with the extracted matter. To begin, let me share a quotation that challenges the concept of architecture as the design of isolated buildings. In the introduction to her famous book, Extra Statecraft, Keller Easterling writes as following: while evidence of infrastructure space within the contemporary city might appear to confirm the death of architecture, perhaps it really only demonstrates that the giant is alive again. Architecture makes unique objects, while a constant flow of repeatable spatial formulas constructs a sea of urban spaces. Architects and urbanists typically characterize this state of affairs as disempowering, but perhaps architecture is reincarnate as something more powerful, as information itself. Infrastructure space has become a medium of information with the power and currency of software. It is an operating system for shaping the city. Easterling's concept of architecture focuses on shaping the potential of buildings and cities by shaping the logic of spatial organization through infrastructure. In this sense, architecture is a meta-science with the potential to understand and to govern the spatial forms of social and economic production. Given Easterling's heavy reliance on post-Marxist theory, her sharp focus on the city should not come as a surprise. For Easterling, architecture is clearly a city-based discipline. This is not due to lack of awareness of suburban areas or rural areas. Rather, the economic logic of the city appears to have taken over the whole world. This idea was already present in post-Marxist theories in the 1960s. Guy Debord, a key figure in post-Marxism, wrote The Society of the Spectacle in 1967, the same year as Smithson published his essay in Art Forum. In this extremely condensed writing, Debord dedicates a few pages to the relationship between the city and its surroundings. On the one hand, the city swallows up its own surroundings because the countryside is nothing more than a supply center and a waste dump for the city. It provides food, a place for the workers to relax, and so on. At the same time, however, the countryside and suburbs are not actively involved in history because the course of actual historical time is negotiated only in the polis. History happens where infrastructure is condensed. Electronic lights, public transport, museums, public spaces in general, fast internet, communication, universities, but also spaces like this formulate a vision of the future. Ever since the French Revolution, the driving force of modern history, that is actually the political struggle and the leftist idea, has been based in the city. And I think that after a short period of computer positivism, as it was presented at the 7th Architecture Biennial in the year 2000, we had to realize, after events like Occupy Wall Street in 2011, and these events, I think, changed our perception that only an internet connection cannot replace the city as a stage of the politics. Passaic resembles actually the economically accumulated and politically discarded suburb of Debord. As Robert Smithson recognized during his journey, the suburb of Passaic is somehow removed from time. While the city shapes history through its vision of the future, which constantly references the past, time simply passes in the suburb without becoming history. Smithson's monuments do not refer to some events or ideas of the past. They are much more like present memories of a future. These memories will disappear without a trace as soon as the constructions are finished. He writes on his visit in Passaic as follows: that zero panorama seemed to contain ruins in reverse, that is, all the new construction that would eventually be built. This is the opposite of the romantic ruin, because the buildings don't fall into ruin after they are built, but rather rise into ruin before they are built. This anti-romantic mise-en-scene suggests the discredited idea of time and many other out-of-date things. But the suburbs exist without a rational past and without the big events of history. Or maybe there are a few statues, a legend, a couple of couriers, but no past. Just what passes for a future. A utopia minus a bottom, a place where the Passaic concrete plant does a good business in stone, bituminous, sand, and cement. Smithson published 6 photographs alongside the essay, A Tour of the Monuments of Passaic. The Bridge Monument, the Pumping Derrick, the Great Pipe Monument, the Phantom Monument Bird's Eye View, the Phantom Monument Side View, and the Sandbox Monument, which he also called the Desert. He's actually writing very tactile on his journey to Passaic and upon discovering the Bridge Monument, and I would like to show you a short paragraph of his essay. The bus passed over the first monument. I pulled the buzzer cord and got off at the corner of Union Avenue and River Drive. The monument was a bridge over the Passaic River. Noonday sunshine cinemized the site, turning the bridge and the river into an overexposed picture. Photographing it with my Instamatic 400 was like photographing a photograph. When I walked on the bridge, it was as though I was walking on an enormous photograph that was made of wood and steel, and underneath the river existed as an enormous movie film that showed nothing but a continuous blank. What does that actually mean? Why does Smithson feel as if he's taking a photograph of a photograph? I think what Smithson recognizes as a photograph is in fact a staged composition. The bridge clearly appears to be a composition that serves as a stage placed above the flow of time, above the river. The bridge creates a place that is architecturally and infrastructurally conditioned to serve as the backdrop for the production machine of everyday life. This infrastructure set design for the capitalist administration of the everyday can be seen most clearly in the suburbs. In the city, the maternity clinics, the water pipes, the grocery shops, the labor routes, factories, the old people's homes, and finally the cemeteries all fit into the history of the built urban structure. The artificial infrastructure and architectural composition of the city has already become naturalized as part of a historic urban structure. On the contrary, the logic of infrastructure cannot hide behind historical references in the suburb. The infrastructure in Passaic reveals itself to be the foundation of an architectural stage on which life will be performed. A bridge is, of course, creating new routes that connect urban economic centers. It collects the land masses and defines a specific path over the river. However, the bridge is not only a dispositive of movement. It is also a part of the visual perspective of a society traveling direction final frontier by car, and so it provides the backdrop to the American dream. A landscape observed from a bridge is actually a staged place perceived from a junction of its motorized economic pre-organization. The view from the bridge over Passaic River shows a strange landscape. Yes. The planetary abyss of materiality is enclosed, limited, rationalized here. The paradigmatic or primordial infrastructure precedes the production, that is the transformation of matter into objects, into narratives, and into history. The infrastructure pre-organization of the capitalist stage is charged with the aesthetics of accumulation, sexuality, and violence, and, of course, abjection. Smithson was aware of this and wrote the following sentences. Nearby on the riverbank was an artificial crater that contained a pale limpid pond of water, and from the side of the crater protruded 6 large pipes that gushed the water of the pond into the river. This constituted a monumental fountain that suggested 6 horizontal smokestacks that seemed to be flooding the river with liquid smoke. The great pipe was in some enigmatic way connected with the infernal fountain. It was as though the pipe was secretly sodomizing some hidden technological orifice and causing a monstrous sexual organ, the fountain, to have an orgasm. Organic life forms have a very limited or no presence at all in the photographs of Smithson. Instead of plants, animals, it is the derrick, the pipe, and the fountain that seem to inhale and exhale, to dwell and to desire. This entire system of infrastructural accumulation and ejection is connected to the abyss of crystalline materiality, to stones, to sand, and to cement. The infrastructure appears to feed on Earth's materiality. In doing so, it is actually not introducing but questioning the binarity between organic life and inanimate matter. The absence of nature implies the absence of cyclical time or cyclical time structures. There is no direct connection between the inhabited surface of the Earth and its human inhabitants. Rather, the infrastructure mediates between the abyss of matter and the arrow of capitalist acceleration. Human blindness to geological time, such as the erosion of the rocks or the lifespan of the Passaic River, produces the idea of a clear cut or a clear difference between a linear history inhabited by generations of mankind and the expanding spiral of the sphere of symmetry and infinity. This sphere is the form and temporality of the inanimate matter. Let me quote Smithson once more to demonstrate the experience of infinity. In June 1968, my wife Nancy Holt, also a very famous artist, Virginia Down, she was Smithson's gallerist, and Dan Graham, another conceptual artist, and I visited the slate quarries in Pennsylvania. Banks of suspended slate hung over a greenish-blue pond at the bottom of a deep quarry. All boundaries and distinctions lost their meaning in this ocean of slate and collapsed all notions of Gestalt unity. The present fell forward and backward into a tumult of de-differentiation. And I just would like to use the kind of sublime photography of Edward Bertensky to illustrate the thoughts of Smithson. It's a quarry in Vermont. The bloodless body of infrastructure feeds on a foundation of abyss and symmetry, and it feeds us too, as it precedes and constitutes capitalist territory and production. Being in the future means seeing and understanding how a map or an architectural master plan projects new pipes, roads, bridges, preparing the sheer infinity and immortality for the maintenance of the mortal world, and the linear tale of development, which has been called many times history. The center of linear temporality is the city, where time manifests itself as history. Since the city seems to accumulate the entire Earth, it also projects its linear temporality. Its spatial and metaphysical or virtual future is infrastructurally prepared and mediated. Passaic is the place where the vision of a future confronts the non-linear infinity of matter. Smithson's photographs are, in my opinion, depictions of the Anthropocene. First and foremost, the Anthropocene is a geological age, thus time is at the core of the term. Interestingly, this periodization itself reflects modernist thinking and the perception of time as an arrow. From the perspective of linear time, the Anthropocene seems to be an epoch in which humanity became the driving force of geological change. However, there is another perspective. Capitalist production accumulates and processes more and more matter, thus constructing a stage that increasingly incorporates infinity. The capitalist future seems to be infected by the abyss and symmetry of matter. It is not only the runaway feedback of capitalist acceleration that consumes infinity, infinity also infiltrates capitalism itself. The rigid temporality of the stones, sand, and cement seeps into the temporality of acceleration. The more matter we process, the more our architecture and cognitive spatial structures resemble the symmetry and abyss of a stone desert. In my opinion, it is no coincidence that both futurism and postmodernism existed only briefly as ties. Both took a critical stance towards the structures of the time and history. One imagined a dynamic and non-repeating or non-symmetrical future, while the other rendered the past unsuitable for a linear narrative. Thus, symmetry and infinity were called into question on the one hand, and a row-like linearity on the other. However, capitalism seems to be based on growth, but on growth of infinite repetition, so neither futurism nor postmodernism emerged as the favored architectural form. Although the economy seems to be linked to growth, the basis of this growth, the consumption of crystalline matter, leads to regularity and stagnation in spatial organization. Everything seems to resemble, as Easterling writes, International Organization for Standardization oversees global technical standards for everything from credit card thickness to dashboard pictograms, computer protocols, and the pitch of screw threads. Shenzhen is a double of Hong Kong, Pudong doubles Shanghai, the City and Industrial Development Company of Maharashtra, operating under the motto, "We make cities," is making the double of Mumbai. Capitalism is based on the accumulation of matter and thus on abyss and symmetry. This is why uniformity goes hand in hand with financial growth. It is telling that the ultimate symbol of desire and beauty, actually the iPhone, is covered by a piece of perfectly polished glass and resembles some sublime infinity and symmetry, and of course it's a serial product. It is telling that Seestadt Aspern in Vienna, one of the biggest city development projects of Europe, is nothing else than a new town built of concrete slabs using actually ridiculous attempts to individualize the facades. In conclusion, I would argue that in the Anthropocene, futurism and traditionalism could be potential allies because they both attempt to escape the desert of infinity, either through accelerationism or by reintroducing circularity. Architecture should definitely envision a xenotopia, a not yet known future, but it also needs to be freed from the idea of firmitas or stability. Thank you very much.